Hi, and welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love during an election. I'm so happy today to have my friend Mike Murphy join us. Mike is a spiritual director living in Sarasota, Florida, after living in the Chicago area for many years. Mike and his wife Anita have been in Florida for 3 or 4 years.
4 years now.
Oh man, and doing spiritual direction work, also doing some racial justice work at his church. And one of the things I want to talk to him about today is that he also writes an article. I would call it an article called Friday Rumblings, and he posts that on Facebook, and it's public, and so you can look him up at Murph's Place, MURPHSPLACE, and I hope everyone will find him. So welcome, Mike, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Jen. It's good to reconnect with you.
So the first thing I was going to ask you is just sort of a little bit, and I know some of this just from knowing you personally, but a little bit of your journey in terms of your career and also sort of the evolution of your faith and your political activism. The Friday Rumbling, I've noticed over the last months have gotten more political and I think really powerful. And I feel like you're really speaking truth into this moment. But
Yeah.
when you started, they weren't started posting those a few years ago. They weren't primarily political observations. So do you want to talk about sort of your journey as a person of faith, but also how that intersects too with your interest in this political moment?
Yeah. Well, thanks for noticing all of that. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think when I first started doing the rumblings, I was doing so much reading and processing that all of a sudden I began to say, well, I just need to journal these out. And it became 10 things every week that I would put on Facebook. At the time, I was working for a church. So I had to be a little bit careful. Well, not just a little bit careful, a lot careful about what it is I wrote or what it is because people were reading it. And it's surprising, even the mildest of things can get you in trouble in a church setting, right? Mm-hmm. And so now that I'm retired and just volunteering at a church, I feel a certain freedom to say a little bit more about what it is I believe and why. And that's been a very, very good thing. But my interest in politics goes back a long way. I was a political science major in college. Mm-hmm. My aunt's been in the Minnesota State Legislature for, I think, 44 years. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Obviously, she doesn't believe in term limits. So it's... And it's been so proud of her over the years of what she's been able to stand for and do. So a little bit of that has really rubbed off on me. And I consider it really important stuff.
I didn't realize you had been a political science major. I always think of you in, sort of your ministry kind of hats that you used to wear when we were living in the same area. But how, as a person who's really thought intentionally about our political system, how are you dealing with this moment? How are you making sense of it?
Well, in all honesty, I think it's one of the hardest things to make sense of that I've ever encountered. Mm-hmm. I've never seen anything quite like this. It kind of breaks all the norms that we thought were established. It's revealing our weaknesses as a country. It's showing us where our warts are. And I think it's problematic because people just don't even know what to do with it all. And the problem is when you know some history about our country and you know something about government and whatnot, it becomes even more scary because you go, this is, I think the theological term I would use is whacked out. It's really whacked out. And so I find myself in a spot of racing back to scripture often just to find out where I can, anchor myself in something that I believe that is true and good and beautiful and honorable, that will anchor my soul as I try to dive in and help people understand what it is that's going on in the world and help them navigate what it is that they're thinking and feeling.
Mm-hmm. I've seen you in recent weeks really encouraging people to vote, obviously, an important
Yes.
message. Um, and I read something just this morning that there are so many early voters, I forget what the figure was, but that it looks like people actually are coming out and voting already. I mean, my family already has.
Yeah.
I think you
Yes.
have. And so, what other things are you doing to encourage people or to inform them about the importance of this election?
Well, I think there's a lot of signals going out that that this election is under threat of not being accepted as real.
Mhm,
And so I think the best way of avoiding that is to avoid trying to go to a place on election day,
mhm,
but to do a mail-in vote, because and to do it right, to cross all the
mhm,
T's and dot the I's, and I'm even encouraging people not to mail it in,
mhm,
although I think that's perfectly safe. But if they do mail it in, to mail it in quickly. We actually brought ours down to the Register of Voters here in Sarasota because we wanted it to be counted.
mhm,
Because I think this is going to be an election where volumes of people have to speak, because I think we're at a critical juncture in our country. I think this election is going to help redefine where certain elements of Christianity are going to move to what they're going to move towards
mhm,
and be about. And I think that there's a lot on the line with certain freedoms that people have gained over the years that could really be disemboweled if it turns the wrong way.
mhm, mhm. When you talk about
So
church, I know that you've mentioned to me that in your spiritual direction practice, you're helping to um, just bring fresh messages about God and about the divine to people who are feeling confused or disenfranchised from the way they thought of themselves as a person of faith. So, for instance, a person who maybe their whole life thought of themselves as an evangelical, and then in this time, doesn't want to wear that label. I know that's true actually for my mother-in-law, who was so upset and heartbroken when Trump was elected and couldn't understand why her church, her church people, her evangelical people broadly were supporting him, and it was such a disruption to her faith. Not her
yeah,
faith in God, but the way that she kind of placed herself in the kind of spectrum of Christianity. And I know you are walking through that sort of disruption with people one on one in spiritual direction. What are some of the things you do? What are some of your ways of helping them to make sense of their faith once they want to put aside some old labels or some old ways of understanding?
yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, they have to have a safe place where they can talk about the things that have brought them to
Mhm,
that area. Some place where they can just dump and not be judged,
mhm,
because in some ways they end up deconstructing everything.
mhm,
If they were a political kind of person, everything that they kind of believed to be true about, say, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, all of this is getting muddied up in their head. And then all of a sudden they're realizing, oh my gosh, my branch of Christianity is not a safe place to talk about any of this stuff.
mhm,
So the first thing I try to do is provide a safe space, listen enough to the point where I can encourage them that they're not crazy.
mhm,
It just and ask them the question: what invitations of God are you sensing in the midst of this?
mhm,
And then oftentimes it goes to the point where somebody might say, "I no longer, I'm not even sure what I believe any longer. Um, what do I do about that? Because I'm deconstructing everything, and I'm finding myself having to put it all back together."
mhm,
And then so it's really important then for somebody, like myself, to say, that's a good process.
mhm,
That's a noble journey. That's a good thing.
mhm,
You know, commit that unto the Lord. And what I often say to people is this: today, just give as much as you know of yourself to as much as you know to as much as you know of God.
mhm, mhm.
If you can do that each and every day, something good and vital will happen inside of you because you're being honest.
Mhm.
You know, so somebody stands for God, God, I'm crazy today. I don't even know what I think or believe. Give that
Mhm.
to this God. And I try to encourage them and say, you know, this God is good. He loves you. He cares. And I affirm all those things about God that at least I really believe, and let them know that the journey is not sinful. It's vital. And it's a sacred journey that they're on.
Mhm. Mm.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Are there certain books that you or other resources that you direct people to when they're kind of reconstructing moment?
You know, there's all kinds of books that you know that I suggest to people. I just point them to things that I have read that might help them not think that they're crazy.
Mhm.
So so if I mean, it can be could be for everything from N.T. Wright. You know, I talked to somebody today about N.T. Wright, uh, and it can also be as something as simple as Ian Crone's book Chasing Francis, where somebody, you know, it's a small novel where an evangelical pastor is on the lookout for what was it I believe anymore, and he ends up following in the footsteps of Francis of Assisi. So it's everything in between there. Use the Enneagram at times with people. Uh, I love. I encourage people to start reading a different version of Scripture. I'm pointing more and more people to you know, the Message version of the Bible. I've been using this passage a lot. It's from Matthew and the Message. Do you mind if I read it? It's
Yeah.
short. Jesus is talking, and he says, "Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Well, come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly."
Mm.
And just that message of a good God that just says, "Oh, come on to me. You know, just come to me." And that's I think in spiritual direction, uh, being in the presence of a God who loves you is really kind of what it's all about. That's what one of my spiritual directors told me. Mike, the secret is just being in the presence of God in the present moment.
Mm.
Easier said than done, but it's an important lesson.
Mhm.
So I think when you do spiritual direction, you just try to say, where is this person at? Some people are pretty good. They can pretty much direct themselves, but they just want to. So we have this really beautiful dialogue about what it is they're thinking and feeling, and it does get into politics. And some of the comments people make are harsh. You know, they're really angry, and they're oftentimes very angry at their church uh, that they think has become a civil religion. You know, I mean, they need believing a certain way, the only way that you can believe. So they get mad at that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, are you finding that the people who are kind of reconstructing are leaving their churches? Or are they finding safer spaces that feel more at home to them now? Or
Well, with coronavirus, you know, it's harder to get to a church, so people have a little bit of a window
Mhm.
where they just don't have to show up.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that's actually been helpful to them, where they can kind of get their act together again, or start a different kind of journey with without a lot of pressure of seeing people in person and
Mhm.
having to explain themselves. But yeah, I think people, um, I'm sensing that there's more and more people going back to mainline churches
Mhm.
from evangelical churches. Some people back into Catholicism. I think the Episcopal Church has had a lot of people come in. As one pastor told me one time, he says, you know what? When I retire, all I want to do is I want to find an Episcopal church. You know, that's all I want to do. Find an Episcopal church. I want to go into the pew. I want to sing the songs. but I don't even have to sing because he says I don't think Episcopalians sing all that well. I just want to sing the songs, listen to the readings, go to communion. If it's a short sermon, that would be great. Under 10 minutes, and then walk away.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
says that's all I need. That's all I need to feed me, to sit at the table with other people.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are yearning for that kind of thing.
I think that's an interesting, when you said sit at the table with other people, I go to an Episcopal church, as you know. But one thing that always strikes me when I've been to evangelical churches over the years, if a friend's baby is getting not baptized, but like received or whatever, those kind of things. I do note the difference between the way that we speak in the Episcopal Church, always as a we. Our confession is a we, our prayers are a we. It's really, there's an understanding that we're part of this corporate group,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so often I think one of the things when I know of someone who is leaving kind of a more evangelical practice, it's that they are tired of just all the personal pressure and all the focus on like
Hmm.
individual salvation, individual righteousness, and individual all these things. And it's true that within the Episcopal Church, we don't focus on that. We focus on who are we as a people? What are we doing, as a group? And so that might be a very comforting thing for someone um, like that pastor who wants to go to an Episcopal church, and I hope he will. And if he lives in the Chicago area, he can come to mine. But
I'll suggest that. I know where yours is.
Mhm.
Yes. I think people are looking for a different kind of rhythm in their life.
Mhm.
And they're looking for a place where they can be honest. And they're just tired of 50-minute sermons,
Mhm.
singing the same song over and over again,
Mhm.
uh, you know, um, 10-minute songs. And that sounds harsh because I've been in worship experiences where that's been just beautiful, but I think they're looking for something else. I
Mhm.
think pastors are looking for something else, the men and women.
Mhm.
I remember being part of Ruth Haley Barton's Transforming Center for 2 years, and a cohort of 70. And each time we were together, there would just be, we'd pray together 3 or 4 times a day, times of silence, group spiritual direction. And it was marvelous.
Mhm.
I mean, it was a balm that came over by everyone.
Mhm.
And I just sense that's what people are looking for. Something that where they can come, they can be themselves. That they don't have to worry too much about saying the wrong thing.
Mhm.
And they can just feel the presence of God in the company of others.
Mhm.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, talk to me more about the Friday rumblings and sort of how, if you look back over the years and think about when you started them and how they are now and and the responses you've gotten, do you have a narrative that you sort of can summarize what it's been like, or how your thinking has changed, or anything about the history of the rumblings?
Well, I can pretty much trace a lot of my, personal history. When a little bit of my story, I was at a suburban church in Chicago. And then made a decision just to go half-time there, and went into the city to a place called Breakthrough Urban Ministries. When I went to Breakthrough, that changed a lot of things, because all of a sudden was in a um, East Garfield Park, which can be a tough place, working with a staff that was just wonderful, working in a very, black, white work environment. Yeah, with homeless people and others. Yeah, that kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things. I began to realize what I didn't know. And that's how I grow, when I realize these are the things that I just don't know. And so I began to write a little bit more about justice kind of issues. And that scared some people. And, but that was okay. That was okay, because if they were honest about being afraid, I'd invite them down, and I'd do a little tour with them. And we could talk about a lot of the issues that they were afraid of. Um, when I came down here to Florida, and justice, by the way, is a very difficult thing to talk about. I can't you can't even begin to understand the trouble I got in for writing about justice from church folks.
Mm.
They were just mad at me for taking the stances that I did. I think when Anita and I went, I think to one of the first BLM marches in Chicago, we went down there on a cold October, morning, and just writing about that caused me all kinds of pain. The ramifications from that. But very happy that we did that. So as you begin to care, you begin to become a little bit more outspoken, and that what I found is that really rattles the cages of people especially who feel very privileged,
Mm-hmm.
and they just don't know what to do with it. They don't know what to do with it, and so that's what began to happen in my life. And then down here, I think with the election of Donald Trump, something stirred in me, and I knew instantly that we were in deep trouble. That there was something not right with the man personally. I know he's created by a good God, loved by God, but something just wasn't right. You could see the narcissism up front. And so I began to point that out. And people took me to task for that because they didn't understand that I was still trying to be a loving person by pointing it out. Mm-hmm. They just thought I was judgmental. So I think in the last 4 years, everything has become more divisive.
Mm-hmm. Have people stuck with you, like the people who read Ramblings, 4 years ago, and then were offended when you pointed out, cruelty or other things that the president was doing? Have you seen any transformation in any of those readers where over the course of this time they start to see what you were talking about? Or do you think people just kind of stay in their little bubbles? And because I think, we do see that in social media, our feeds are so, we're surrounded by people who are like-minded, which is one of the things I love about your ramble.
Yeah.
You can kind of, you're a voice that maybe is the only one who's speaking out against these things. So do you see any transformation in your readers?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm sure I've been blocked by some people, and that's fine. And I have blocked some because sometimes in Facebook threads people get pretty mean, and I don't mind forthrightness. I just don't like meanness. But I think some people have begun to think about things and read some things that have been helpful for them in their journey. I can't quantify that at all, but I just see it, and I think sometimes when they see how I interact with people on that, sometimes I wish they wouldn't, but they say, okay, now I see how I can interact with somebody else without yelling at them. Mm-hmm. This is what I can do. I deliberately decided not to do this in a blog. I don't keep track of how many people, read my stuff. My guess is a couple thousand, but that's just a guess. So I know I have impact, mm-hmm. and I just don't know how far that goes. I just don't know how far that goes. But if I can help somebody to think just a little bit, then it's well worth it. I don't have a lot of big dreams for myself. I'm not going to run for office. I'm not going to be a pastor at a church again. But boy, if I can say something to get somebody to think, I'm very, very happy about that. Mm-hmm. I know I learned some things from people. I have people that are just amazingly smart that chime in. There's one, and I love it when they do. I think one of my favorite things is when somebody went after a woman I said, basically saying, what the hell do you know about anything in government? Kind of like, you're a woman, and and uh, she just shot back, and she says, "You mean other than the fact I work for the CIA, George Bush's White House,
Mhm.
all these." So, I guess I don't know anything. Maybe I shouldn't take such delight in those kind of things, but I'm like, good for you.
Right. You let
You
them back.
stood up for.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I felt good about that. But it's amazing sometimes when somebody is just faced with being wrong. I very rarely see anybody ever apologize
Hmm.
and say, "I shouldn't have written that. That was stupid of me." That
Hmm.
you've heard me. I've heard you, and I've changed my point of view.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, I, I don't. That's the thing that's sad sometimes,
Mhm.
and also I realize that most people don't know how to write, which you probably noticed too.
I've noticed that once or twice. Yes. Um, well, this series, is faith, hope, and love during an election, and the way you're describing, the way you talk with people of all different convictions and backgrounds and so on,
Yeah.
not only as a spiritual director but in response to your writing. Do you have any best practices that you keep in mind, like when there are nasty comments and you feel activated and do you have some way that you keep yourself intentional about the way you are able to treat people with faith, hope, and love, even during a contentious season and a painful season?
Uh, I try. All I can say is I think I try my best. I don't think I have any tricks. Sometimes it's just by saying to someone, "I think you're out of line here,"
Hmm.
and maybe you can think of another way of phrasing this, or I'll private message somebody and say, "Come on, this isn't in keeping of what we started."
Hmm.
If somebody decides to take over a thread, I just remind them that it's my thread,
Hmm.
and that it, if they really really want, to spout their stuff, do it on your page.
Hmm.
But people come to mind because there's action,
Hmm.
and so they try to do it. So I think what I always try to be is kind and as direct as I know how to be,
Hmm.
and that works. But sometimes I have to admit, and I get snide, and I get a little cranky,
Hmm.
and and those are the times I regret. But I think I'm able to go back and say, to the person, that I was a little too rough on you.
Hmm. Well, you said you don't see people apologize, but I feel like over the years I have seen you apologize or at least go back and soften things. So, I mean, I would point out that in addition to the content and the kind of invitation to think about complicated issues, you're also modeling something that we
Yeah.
don't have modeled in our broader culture very well right now about civil
Y-
discourse.
So thank you. Yeah, I do. I do try to. I do try to do that because I think there's a way of being Christ-like in our world that doesn't steer us away from hard conversations, uh, but shows us how we can do hard conversations. And
Mhm.
that's always a good thing, Jennifer, if we can learn how to do it. But boy, we have not people how to. We don't know how to talk about the tough things. We don't know how to talk about justice. We don't know how to talk about the poor very well. We don't know how to talk about the distribution of wealth. We just are great at hurling things at each other that says, "Oh, you're a socialist.
Mhm.
You're a lefty. You're a far right, idiot. Whatever it is." And that's not, that isn't helpful.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, but I get all those kind of folks that kind of come together, and I just appreciate them very very much. And
Mhm.
some people leave for a season and then they come back.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, and I try to suggest books and tell them about things I'm reading, and put it into context of things that I'm experiencing here in Sarasota. Yeah, because I want them to know that it's good to have a life, and Facebook is not my life.
Right. That's right. Thank goodness. Right. Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness, yes.
Hmm. Wow.
More, I think Zoom is my life, but that's another story.
Don't we all? Yes, exactly. Well, I have one last question for you because I don't want to take too much of your time.
That's all right.
So when we look at this time, and again, the series is Faith, Hope, and Love during an election, is there anything that brings you hope right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think hope in many respects is something that we choose. I also believe it's a fruit of the Holy Spirit, and so I think I would be nothing if I didn't have a sense of hope within me. And I think that hope uh, resides in the knowledge that God is God is at work. I remember doing a sermon once that said we have to realize that God is always up to something,
Hmm.
but we have to ask the question. "Oh, I wonder what He's up to now." And then even in asking those kind of questions, I have a great hope because it anchors me back in the reality that I really do believe in this good God that cares about us as people. And I don't think He's planning to abandon us. I think He's still planning to be with us. And that's the greatest hope that I have. Apart from that, I have great hope as I read the polls in this next election. It chose my candidate up in double digits in a lot of places. I'm not cheering right now because I know how hard the polls are to read.
Mhm.
But I have hope that good people are going to get out there and we can begin to see a change in things. But I also want help to help people realize that no matter who wins, if their candidate wins and it's not Trump, that's not going to be the end of Trump.
Mhm.
He's going to find another place to land. You know, he's going to end up someplace where he's still going to be commenting on American society, and that's going to be very hard for anybody in elected office. Uh, because he'll be totally unfettered with that. So I'm hopeful, but cautiously optimistic. I think it's going to be a lot of work. As Eugene Peterson said in his book about the Psalms of Ascent, it's a long obedience in the same direction.
Mhm.
I think that's where we are with our democracy right now. One vote in November isn't going to solve anything. I think we're going to be playing parts of this tune for the next 10 or 15 years.
Mm. Wow.
And the hope in that is that more people will be involved in the process.
Mhm.
And I believe that's going to happen. I think people are going to be awakened.
That's great. I hope so too. Well, thank you so much for this time. It has been so good to talk with you, and also I hope that you'll find more readers, and I will put your Facebook, again, it's Facebook, it's a public page, and it's
Right.
at Murph's Place, MURPHSPLACE. And every Friday afternoon or morning you post.
Every morning.
Yeah, okay. And then the conversation ensues.
Then the conversation ensues, and so it's fun. Yeah, I enjoy it. It's my, what it is, Jennifer. It's my way of journaling now.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a spiritual practice. I get to journal
Mm-hmm.
and interact with people on that, and that's pretty exciting.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we will try to remain hopeful together.
Yes, we will. All right. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.